Side note, I'm really amused at this owl above my head. Hello! It is I, Serendipity Wyrd, coming to you this week after a really challenging, energetic, and emotional week. I know I have been struggling. My sleep pattern is totally off. I was up till 4 o'clock this morning and then back up at 9, and I am all over the place. I expect that likely you probably are feeling some of that too. I'm gonna get real and uncomfortable for me for a second. I don't generally talk a lot about these things publicly or push my politics really out there, but this week was atrocious. The events that happened on Wednesday with insurrectionists freaking storming the Capitol and destroying property was just unfathomable. At the same time, completely not surprising because we've had 4 years of this being egged on, these divisions being created in our society. And all of this conflict and all of this challenge is creating energetic ripples that if you happen to be an empath like me, you may be having a really difficult time dealing with it. I know for me, sometime about last weekend, I was really hit suddenly with all these really raw emotions and these I was just very, very emotional, and I didn't have an immediate explanation for that, like what was happening in my own personal world. You know, there was nothing really to explain that. And I found myself just really struggling. And then when everything started going down on Wednesday and I've got the news on, which I normally do not watch the news. That's just, I decided in 2016 that I could not news anymore. It was not good for my mental health or my emotional health. And I started really tuning that out. I would unfollow friends on Facebook who were very vocal, unfriend, people if it came to my attention that they really held beliefs that I could not give credence to or allow in my social sphere. And obviously that's only gotten kind of more intense, especially as the election in 2020 ramped up. That being said, on Wednesday, I had to watch the news. I needed to know what was happening. It was so incredibly horrendous. It really brought me back to 2001 and the palpable fear that was everywhere as the events of 9/11 were happening. So as I was thinking about what am I going to do for a video this week? I was like, all right, well, I guess it's time to get out of the comfort zone and talk about these things because they're not going to go away, at least not in the short term. And there's no good way to move through these things. And by these things, I mean any really challenging, tragic, or traumatic experiences without addressing them. We can try ignoring them, right? And sometimes distractions are necessary, I feel like, in coping. By all means, if for your health and sanity, you need to not tune into the news or engage with some of that information, that is completely legit. I believe we are all here. We all have our own ways of interacting, and we all have our own parts to play on improving the general social structure of the world, our communities, our lives, our countries. And with that though, I feel like no matter what we are here to do or what our experiences are, we have to start with ourselves, because that when we don't have a good sense of equanimity or center as we're moving through really, really difficult things, everything else just gets harder. I have been dealing my whole life with trying to figure out how to navigate life being a ball of emotion that can cry at the drop of a hat and that really has a hard time seeing other people struggle and other people experience hate and exclusion and violence and that sort of thing. So now we're at this place in history where these events are happening, and I'm like, initially it's probably very similar to what you might be experiencing. My initial reactions on Wednesday were very fearful, very what the WTF, oh my gosh. And that spiraled a little bit. And then I took a moment to kind of start to look at what witchy ways do I have? What spiritual technologies do I have that can help me through this? Because nothing is going to be helped by me giving into my fear. And I generated a list of 7 witchy ways to move through periods of emotional and energetic turmoil and overwhelm and try to ease your way towards a center so that you can deal with what's lying in front of you, whether that's happening immediately in your own life or whether that's happening on a grand social scale. I'm hoping that these tools will give you starting points to figure out what works in your life. So the very, very first thing that I always address when I am feeling stressed, when I am feeling anxious, when I have this spiral start up is I look at what is happening in my body. And in general, kind of my spiritual path tends to focus on what is manifest and what is in my physical reality before I start to kind of look at the spiritual reality. You may look at things differently. That's totally cool. I am not here to tell you that my way is the best or your way is not the best or whatever. I'm here to give you things that work for me. And if they work for you too, that's freaking awesome. I have achieved something that I want to achieve. That is awesome. But this is my worldview. So I start with my physical, tangible reality. And so that starts with my body, and that starts with where am I at right now? Because when I am feeling stressed, when I am facing this information about atrocious, horrible, awful things happening in the world, that's really hard to deal with because there's nothing that I can immediately do. So it's just taking in this information and having to deal with it. It doesn't immediately go away. There's no magic wand that I can wave that gets certain presidents out of the White House and that gets the government in a wholly different space of supporting people and with equality across the board, no matter, race, gender, sexuality, what have you, religion, all of that fun stuff. I don't have a magic wand to fix these huge freaking problems. And that's really frustrating because I wish I did. So if I let myself stay focused on these problems, when they are problems I don't have solutions to and I cannot by myself immediately fix, I just stay in a really keyed up state of stress and anxiety. And that's where my witchcraft comes in. That's where my spiritual practices come in. So I take a look at my body, and how my body is reacting is the number one cue for me that I am stressed or anxious. I notice that my heart rate has increased, and I've noticed that my breathing has increased. Those are normally the first 2 things that I notice. And that's because that's naturally what happens as part of the fight or flight response kicking in response to stress, which happens faster than our conscious minds can even relate to. And then we're just in this keyed up state that our body will try to keep us in if we're still exposed to the stimuli, which on a day where all of the news is constantly coming in and you don't know what's happening, and something that's never really happened in the history of our country is happening, it's freaking hard to deal with, right? Like, you even turning off the news does not make that go away. You know that still happens. So my very, very first witchy tip in this to deal with this sort of thing when you are facing emotional and energetic overwhelm is to check in with your body and to, more importantly, check in with your breath. Why check in with the breath? Great question. I'm glad that you asked. Because the breath can derail that physiological process that has kicked up and has started and that is going into gear. Slowing down the breath, backing up as part of the fight or flight response. Heart rate increases to pump more blood throughout the body, and breathing rate increases in order for the lungs to pull in more oxygen because there's more blood pumping. You need oxygen in the brain to be alert, so on and so forth. So I don't really have a good way to immediately interact with how fast my heart is or isn't racing, except for my breath. When I shift my focus from whatever's going on around me to what is happening in my body and what specifically is happening with my breath, I have the opportunity to derail this physiological process that's happening. This is where I immediately begin trying to regain control over my breath. I will notice that my breathing has become more shallow. It's all up in my chest. I'm probably mouth breathing. Honestly, probably my mouth is hanging open and I'm only breathing through my mouth. The breathing rate is really, really quick. I notice these things. And then I make a conscious effort to close my mouth, inhale through my nose, and to take as long as I can with that inhale. And then pause at the top before I let it go. And sometimes that pause is just the most infinitesimal, tiniest little pause. And then open my mouth and physically push the air out of my body. If a sigh happens, if a growl happens, if any sort of vocalization happens with that, that's actually fantastic. That's awesome. That helps me get rid of some of that excess energy, excess emotion, and come to a bit of a better space of equilibrium. Now, I emphasize slowing down that inhale and pausing at the top as much as I can, because when you're really freaking out about something, control over your breath is not super easy. Like right now, I'm in a decent place, even though, thinking about this has me worked up a little bit. Like I can feel that my heart's racing a little bit more. I have pretty much my normal rate of breath. And if I wanted to control it, that's, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if I have already started to spiral into a panic attack, into a heightened state of anxiety, if I am crying big, ugly, fat tears, I'm probably not going to be able to get a hold of my breath immediately. And that's okay. So the using breath as a technique for using your witchcraft to bring you to a space where you can deal with the emotional and energetic overwhelm is a process. Sometimes it's one breath. Sometimes it's a bunch of breaths. There's no judgment there. That's totally okay. The point is to keep trying to elongate that inhale, pause in between inhale and exhale, and then let it out as much as possible. I've trained myself on this technique over the past, honestly, it's 20 years at this point, which kind of blows my mind. And I'm like, what? To where it's second nature to me. And I get a fantastic release of energy every time that I exhale consciously. The point is that we're taking a response in our body that is generally kind of an unconscious action. It's involuntary. It's just happening. Our body is keeping us alive, bringing in oxygen. That's great. And we're turning it into a conscious activity, which also helps push out everything else that's going on. And it helps to link us to our energetic states. This is what makes this sort of breathing witchy and magical and helps us on a spiritual level. Once I have control over my breath, that's where I'm going to utilize my favorite practice of 3 long, slow inhales and exhales, each one becoming a little longer than the one prior. Because this is a super short practice, I will demonstrate it here. You will hear me if you follow me on various social media. I talk about this all the time because it is so central to everything I do, and to not be a completely out of control emotional mess throughout my day-to-day life, because otherwise I totally would be. So to utilize this breath practice, it's very simple. Once you have control of your breath, you're just going to inhale in through the nose, hold it, exhale out through the mouth. You can count if that works for you. No, a lot of people recommend this practice as a 4-square breathing practice, where you inhale for 4, hold it for 4, exhale for 4, hold it for 4. Sometimes people omit the last holding it for 4, and you just cycle that. I have found that useful. I've also found it just useful to take 3 slow breaths and try to make each one a little longer. So that's how we'll do it today. Just get comfortable, close your eyes if you want to, close your mouth, and inhale through the nose. Really pull the air in, let it sink all the way down into your belly, past the chest, in through the diaphragm, all the way into the belly. Hold it at the top, open the mouth. Sigh if you want to. And just do that 2 more times. Inhaling through the nose, holding it at the top, opening the mouth. One more time. I'm not going to guide you through it this time. Just take the longest, slowest breath that feels comfortable for you, with that little bit of a pause in between inhale and exhale. that always helps me find center. I use that not only when I am in a not fantastic place and I need to switch up my emotional or energetic state, I also use that every time that I do readings, every time that I'm getting ready to do spell work, I'm going to enter a ritual, whatever. That practice is ingrained in so many places throughout everything I do, both magical and mundane, which for me really overlap and are kind of the same thing. Second witchy way that you can utilize your spiritual practice and your witchcraft to help you navigate emotional and energetic overwhelm, turmoil, and just difficult events is to allow yourself some time in a sacred, safe space. You may want to set this as a very defined time and let yourself know, I'm entering sacred space now, and in 30 minutes I will leave sacred space, if that works for you. You can use an alarm on your phone or a timer of some sort and, make it a very structured, timed thing. Or you can allow yourself to remain in that space as long as you feel you need to be in that space. Really, it's what works for you. With all of the things I suggest, use your discernment to figure out how that best works for you, or if it doesn't. And if it doesn't, don't do it. Sacred safe space can look very different for different people. You can also activate this in different ways depending on what you need. The idea of this, though, is that you're creating a blankie fort of sorts for yourself to hole up in and to feel safe and secure. This can literally be a blankie fort. I encourage building forts out of your furniture and blankets and tapping into that inner child energy and that playfulness, because that can definitely help you switch out of fearful space if you're starting to have fun and to play, or allow space for your inner child who might also be freaking out about this whole experience to feel comforted and soothed as well. Some ideas for creating sacred space: you can cast a circle if that's in your practice. You can call on the elements. You can use whatever sort of circle castings that you typically use and let that be the entirety of what you're doing. Always remember to, if you call on guardians or elements or deities, thank them before you release them. But you can also maybe just crawl under the blanket in your bed and say, this is a sacred space for me right now. I'm staying holed up in this space and I will leave when I'm ready. You can completely use a hoodie as a sacred space. You can put that hood up. You can close out the world a little bit and just kind of exist in this space of comfort and darkness, and emerge like the beautiful butterfly that you are when you're ready. I find that it can be really helpful to maybe have a hoodie that you use for this, so that that's your sacred ritual hoodie. If you have other ritual clothing that helps you get into a I am safe and secure sort of state of mind, you might change into those clothing items. The other day, I was utilizing this tiny top hat as a source of comfort and to create a safe space around me. This tiny top hat made me feel a little more playful. It helped me feel a little bit more in control. And so I utilized that as a tool to keep where I was at any particular moment as a sacred, safe space for myself. Other ways you might view sacred space: I am a hula hooper. I have several hula hoops, and there have been several times in my life where I have taken a hula hoop, laid it on the ground because it's already a circle, and I've just plopped myself in the middle of it and gone, cool, I am protected and I'm safe and I'm in a good spot, and just kind of hung out there. If you are a yogi and you practice yoga, you might have a yoga mat. That mat can signify a safe, reflective, sacred space for you. It might be your kitchen. Maybe you cook a lot and you feel really comfortable in the kitchen. Bring your chair in the kitchen and just sit in there. It might be out in nature. Maybe there's a tree you like to sit under, or a river. Just find a physical location. Again, we're still looking at the physical manifest aspects of dealing with emotions and energetic shifts that are needed. Find a physical location or create space where you feel secure and where you feel that it is safe and sacred. Witchy way number 3 to work with and move through energetic and emotional turbulence, turmoil, overwhelm is movement. Sometimes we need to move to work these currents out of our body, to get them to shift our focus. Yoga is great for this. Dance is great for this. Flow arts, hula hooping, poi, whatever, gymnastics, running, taking a nice slow walk, simply swaying side to side can work. This movement can be as elaborate or simple as is right for you. Experiment with that. Sometimes I have really intense reactions of like rage or anger. And when I'm trying to work that energy out, I need movement to do it. If I just try to sit with that, I have a really hard time processing it. I need the movement to really work it out of my body. So consider movement one of my favorite practices. Again, this leans into kind of the silly and the goofy and the lighthearted and really works well for shifting my energetic state, is to put on the song Shake It Off by Taylor Swift and dance around wherever I am like a total goofball with no regard for how much I am flailing or what sort of movements I have. I am not trying to look good or coordinated at all. I'm trying to do this kind of thing and shake it off. That has worked wonders for me at various times. Witchy way number 4 to switch up your energetic or emotional state and take you out of being in that overwhelm is to commune with deity and or your higher self. However you see that which is greater, however you connect to the spiritual, whether you call that spirit, universe, deity of some form, doesn't matter what words you use, but communing with source. There are lots of ways to do that. Chanting can be really fantastic. Meditation, sitting either in a still meditation, maybe you bring some sort of movement into it, maybe you find some sort of a guided meditation. YouTube is great for that. There are several apps. Or prayer. I know that some people on the more witchy spectrum of spiritual practices have a complicated relationship with a lot of religious terminology, including the word prayer. I find it to be really valuable to explore why that might be a word that's difficult for you if it is. But regardless, however you utilize communication with the divine, that is a possibility here as well. Sometimes taking these huge overarching experiences that we can't deal with ourselves and sharing them with an entity outside of ourselves can be helpful in releasing, which is kind of our goal here, is to release some of this overwhelm. Witchy tip number 5 is to journal. We hear journaling a lot in the witchy world, and immediately the idea is conjured up of a pen and paper and it's all elaborate and beautiful or something, whatever. It doesn't have to be pen and paper. It doesn't have to be even written. You can use your phone to make a video, or you can use a voice recorder. You can take audio journals, video journals. You can write them. You can write them by hand. You can write them on a computer using text. You can dictate it and have a program spit out the words for you. It doesn't matter how you do it. The point is, give yourself a forum for externally processing the crap that's going on in your mind. Allow the magic to happen between all of your thoughts just spiraling and going around and around and around and getting them out onto the page, into the ether. Journaling in some fashion can be a fantastic release for trying to figure out how to process emotions and energies that are beyond the scope of us as individuals. Also, don't discount the possibility of creating magical art. You can paint, you can draw, you can create a mosaic, you can wood burn something. Like, the options for creativity are endless, but sometimes you don't have the words to express what it is that you're struggling with. And it can be helpful to use that external processing from a more symbolic fashion. Sometimes if I'm really angry, I might just want to paint a canvas red. That's it. I don't even want to put specific imagery into it or words or anything. I have done that before and it has been helpful to finding my way back towards center. Witchy tip number 6 is to build an altar or a shrine focused on an aspect of the energy and emotions that you're dealing with to act as a magical portal for supporting what you need to support that you can't fix all at once on your own. While this is a great format for social justice work, that is not the only subject that you can tackle when building an altar. Maybe you're very concerned about the pandemic and you want to build an altar more focused on healing, maybe you are looking a little closer to home and you know that you are really, really struggling with all of this, right? The fact that you're watching this video probably means you're looking for ways to deal with your own emotional and energetic overwhelm. So you can build an altar just around that. Maybe you need to build a self-care altar, something to remind you to take care of yourself. Altars can be amazing magical portals to help sustain us. And like the tips I was sharing in regards to sacred space, an altar can give you that space that when you're having a hard time, you can just go sit with it and just be present with it. Number 7. Of course, I couldn't escape a list of witchy ways to deal with anything without mentioning pulling some cards, throwing some runes, doing some divination. Especially if the ways I outlined about communicating with the divine really don't work with you. You're not into chanting, you're not into meditation, you certainly don't want to pray to anything. Divination can help you create that channel between you and what is beyond you to get some answers. For subjects like this, I like to really dive into what and how questions. How can I navigate this emotional and energetic overwhelm? What's the next step I can take? What can I do right now? What do I need to know right now? Questions like that can help you find a path forward when you really feel like there's no path forward. And if you can't read for yourself, guess what? You can book a reading with me. Tackling questions and subjects like how to navigate emotional overwhelm and how to deal with challenging energetic circumstances are what I read for. That's a lot of where my personal practice has always been, kind of on the edge of shadow work. It can be shadow work, and that's really a space that I thrive reading in. Feel like you need some advice outside of yourself, I'm here for you. Links down below on how to connect with me for that. Changing to the year 2021 did not make it all miraculously go away. We still have to navigate this stuff, but we can navigate this stuff in a way that is spiritually aligned and helps us find a center when it's not really clear right now where the center is of ourselves, of anything. So I hope that at least one of these tips you found useful. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite tip was, what resonated with you the most, and don't be afraid to combine them either. These witchy methods don't exist in a vacuum. You don't have to just do one of them. Above all, I really want you to know that however you are struggling, however you are facing these huge external challenges, you're not alone. You really, really, really aren't. I know it feels that way if you're stuck at home and you're isolated and you don't have anyone around you and you haven't felt physical touch in quite some time. That is the time to lean into spirit, in my opinion. That is the time to try out some spiritual technologies and see what can help bolster you and help center you as you navigate the uncertainty.